Welcome to the What Directors Think webinar, Navigating 2019's Biggest Issues for Public Company Boards, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and Grant Thornton. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm TK Kerstetter, the Editor-at-Large for Corporate Board Member and the host of Inside America's Boardrooms, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the webinar. Joining me today to discuss the key takeaways from this year's What Directors Think study is Nichole Jordan, the National Managing Partner of Markets, Clients, and Industry at Grant Thornton, LLP. Welcome, Nichole.
Thank you, TK. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
So, for the past 16 years, Corporate Board Member has conducted the What Directors Think study, and this in 2018 in September, October, we partnered with Grant Thornton to survey U.S.-based directors of publicly traded companies. The survey was completed anonymously, addressing 6 overarching issues: economic policies and financial considerations, corporate social responsibility, risk oversight, ethics and culture, board composition and refreshment, and shareholder engagement. And Nichole, if you're ready, we'll get started. So,
sounds great.
The first question is, we asked directors what issues they wish their board could spend more time on discussing at future meetings. We've seen an interesting evolution in these responses over the 6 years, and as you can see in the slide, the evolution from 2013 to 2019. Long-term strategic planning has owned the top spot for the past 6 years. This year, 23% said they wanted their boards to spend more time on disruptive technologies and innovations, followed by 16% noting growth strategy, 14% cyber risk, 14% CEO succession, and 8% M&A opportunities. So from my perspective, this group got a little more specific, targeting disruptive innovations and technologies, which one could argue is still part of corporate strategy. But overall, I'm very encouraged that they're focusing on core issues of having, for me, the right CEO, addressing risk, and making sure the corporation is going in the right direction. My more pointed question for you, Nichole, is there's a growing sense of urgency for boards to thoroughly evaluate the pool of new technologies that may impact their businesses. What are your thoughts on disruptive technologies and innovations being the #1 issue boards want to spend time on this year?
Absolutely. Thank you, TK. And it's not a surprise, I think, from our perspective. We do see innovation and disruptive technologies as really a top priority for boards. There are a number of ways to assess the possibilities with the disruptive technologies, and we see boards taking a number of different techniques today. One example is to experience these technologies live. And just to share with you, TK, we just returned from the Consumer Electronics Show, where we hosted a cohort of client executives through a curated innovation experience. And the trends on display there really confirm that disruptive technology is revving up for organizations across industry sectors. So we had the opportunity to hear from a number of different leaders, founders, innovators, and really monitoring the trends in that way. We certainly heard from the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association and on some of the horizon level trends. Heard about his new book with Ninja Future and really shares a lot of the innovation best practices. And all of these things are very important for boards as they're looking to stay apprised of these disruptive technologies. But I'll tell you, TK, there were a couple of areas that were of greater significance to us and to our the board and C-suite executives we attended with. One was the speed of digital disruption just continues unabated. The speed at which technology evolves means that our clients need to evaluate their digital readiness. We really encourage boards to balance their time between both the known and the disruptive risks. And some of those include, and we spent a lot of time with these at CES just about a week ago, 5G. So about every 10 years, we experience a new generation of wireless connectivity, and 5G, with its greater speed and capacity and lower latency, is really that connective tissue that will move us from connecting people to connecting things. And it is that critical ingredient supporting innovation across organizations in all industries. Pardon me. So we are seeing the beginning of a multi-year rollout. We saw this with AT&T when they launched the initial mobile 5G network that is in process and expected to go across a number of cities nationwide. Another big area of focus that we, both the C-suite and the boards were focused on was artificial intelligence. And AI is really becoming more emotional, and it continues to dominate technology innovation. So AI systems and devices that will soon recognize, interpret, process, and simulate human emotions. And this will be especially impactful from a board perspective as you consider the future of the workforce. Boards are really smart to understand and monitor this inevitable trend and the possibilities that it creates in bringing more value to customers, in creating a better experience for employees, creating new product offerings, and also enabling the disruption of competitors as well. So a number of different factors that we're seeing with disruptive technologies and innovations, TK.
Well, and it only makes sense that this is a huge challenge for today's boards of directors. These are issues that, when the older directors in the room had their business careers, these were things that at the time weren't issues that they had to deal with. So the challenge for many boards is to keep pace. And when you introduce things like blockchain and cryptocurrency and artificial intelligence, all these things are issues that a board has to keep pace with, because certainly the companies do.
Absolutely,
so,
TK. I'm sorry, I was just going to reiterate and agree with you, and it's so important to keep up an ecosystem of experts that you can really tap into and bring into the board's agenda to help keep apprised. But I agree, it's critical to stay on top of it.
And all that breeds why we're seeing younger directors recruited into boardrooms. So it's not an unusual fact that these are people that are working more closely with these issues, and subsequently the composition of boards is changing a little. So let's look at the next topic, Nichole, and that's the topic for a panel of experts. And along similar lines, we asked directors if they would bring a panel of experts into their boardroom to provide insights on any issue. Which topics would be on the top of the agenda? Interestingly enough, 64% said cybersecurity, and 36% did disruptive innovations, exactly to our points of what we were just discussing about the skill sets of existing directors. 23% said succession planning, and in there I would say both probably CEO and board succession planning, which we'll touch on. 19% said corporate culture. Again, we've seen a lot of that today. And then 17% said shareholder activism. Cyber risk isn't just about hacking anymore. We're seeing obviously more focus from regulatory entities, particularly with regards to data privacy. And, it's my belief, while there are complex challenges facing companies, it also creates giant opportunities for companies who can master digital transformation and the associated cyber risk issues. So certainly this is a big challenge, and a big challenge for those firms like Grant Thornton who help boards. But Nichole, what are the key action items here for boards? What would you pass along, particularly starting with cyber with such a big percentage?
Absolutely, and this is a trend we see as well in with the executives that we interact with. We do see boards becoming more focused on cyber resilience, their ability to continuously function as expected despite an adverse cyber event of any kind. So the introduction of these new technologies really opens the door to cyber risk. We ask our clients, number one, just what are the actions that you are taking to be resilient? And considering the funding that is needed, the cultural change that is needed, the education really across the entire organization and at the board level. It is a continuous learning that is needed today. Secondly, we ask, how do you see artificial intelligence as a contributor to cyber resilience? Often we can help boards understand what AI means in this context. AI is becoming a term with many meanings, so we really work with boards in honing in on what AI can do for them at a governance level with, for example, risk sensing versus what the management team is leveraging AI to drive, perhaps for customers or for greater efficiencies in the business, and just as importantly, what it can't do. A third area is gaining real clarity on who on the board has the oversight responsibility based on the governance structure within the organization. Some allocate that within the risk committee, others within audit, others really view it as, of course, a full board responsibility. So we believe clarity with that area of responsibility is critical. Cybersecurity is also one that we view is important to gain regulatory insight and updates on a regular basis. So in one example in the public company arena, in 2018, the SEC updated guidance for cyber-related disclosures. And so in the words of the chairman, to promote clearer and more robust disclosure by companies about cybersecurity risks and incidents, resulting in more complete information being available to investors. So you see from a regulatory perspective, there was an increase in the desire to be more transparent about these risks and about the processes and controls that companies are putting in place to mitigate the risk. Boards, what we see is oftentimes boards aren't blessed with the cybersecurity expertise among several board members. So it is important to prioritize this. But it certainly is their expertise in the overall risk management and the mission for oversight and governance that should be leveraged to improve cyber resilience. We recommend building into your board agenda the opportunity to hear from experts inside the organization, knowing that the organization has many, including the Chief Information Security Officer and many others, but then also an ecosystem of trusted advisors. And whether that is professional services firms, certainly Grant Thornton does a lot of work in this space, but also with trade organizations, the regulatory bodies, organizations like Gartner, and leading technology firms. We have done some interesting work in teaming together with a Google or an Amazon to get their additional outside perspective in some of the latest trends and areas that they're working on to improve and build cyber resilience. So I do think it takes a team in today's environment, TK, and a team of experts kind of thinking together around the best ways to help build resiliency in the cyber area.
So, Nichole, we had a chance to touch on the cyber part of this question, and previously we had talked about disruptive innovations. I don't want to leave it till we have a chance to touch on the succession, 23% succession planning. And again, I'm going to assume succession of CEOs and succession of board. So when you look at these numbers, we know that obviously succession is critically important, but what are smart boards doing that other boards should emulate in this area of succession?
Absolutely, TK, and I agree. It's such a critical area for the board. We see a number of different best practices, and so I'll outline a few here. That the succession plan should outline specific goals that align with and support the organizational mission, values, and strategic initiatives on an overall basis at the enterprise level. Of course, ensuring the compensation structure is competitive to attract the right talent, but then also from a foundational standpoint, making no assumptions about the succession plan, asking often about the process and the updates, really encouraging the CEO to think about his or her retirement in advance so that planning can commence and communications are in place. We see a great process around ensuring there is a group of qualified candidates from which to select, both internal and external, and understanding the talent development plan for, let's say, the top internal candidates, maybe a top 10, and the experiences that they need to gain over a multi-year period to become a strong CEO candidate. So what are you doing to, from a board's perspective, to understand management's process around the development of that strong CEO pipeline? And just as importantly today is keeping your finger on the pulse of external candidates, perhaps at leading competitors. Even startups need to think about succession planning in the rush of growth and development. This is a key strategic imperative that at times can be overlooked. And I'll touch on another dimension of this, TK, and that is just the planning for diversity in the pipeline. And one element of diversity with the gender representation, we've seen California's new mandate for female representation on boards of public companies, and has a lot of our clients asking about how will this ripple out over the other states. Leaders and boards are really implementing and understanding the need to increase the pipeline of a diverse population of leadership talent. And with gender in particular, making sure that women are gaining the appropriate experience to become successful, qualified board members and C-suite members. So some of the best practices that we see in that area are just developing a program for your top candidates across the board to help ensure that you're building a pipeline of the most qualified candidates, and that is a diverse population. And you may need to develop custom programs to get to that, but that's the outcome you're really trying to get to, is a robust, qualified pipeline of a diverse set of candidates that can move in to that CEO position, TK.
So we'll be talking about the diversity issue in the later question related to attributes of future board members. Just a couple comments when I looked at this slide. First of all, I have to admit that I was surprised that boards, that 23% said that they would bring in a panel of experts on for succession planning. To me, it just doesn't seem like that sort of confusing. Okay, it seems sort of, I would think that there'd be a lot of issues I could think of that a board could use assistance on ahead of that. But at the same time, I guess I'm encouraged that on everybody's mind, and even if that means bringing an expert, so I'm going to say that that's a good thing. The other thing, while I have the opportunity to get on my soapbox a little bit here, is this idea of board succession. We all understand the role of CEO succession, but my own feeling is there's still a lot of boards that have to get this concept of board succession down. When you think of how important the role of board chairs are today and the work that's done between board meetings and in committee meetings, that whenever you bring on a new director, there's got to be enough board leadership that people are thinking through, how does this new director contribute to filling board positions? What skill sets do they bring? Et cetera, et cetera. So while there's maybe nothing more important than CEO succession, follow quickly behind, I don't want to lose sight of the importance of board succession as well. And that's very valuable real estate, and you need to make good decisions on that as well. I'm sure you would support that.
Absolutely, TK. And just to build on what you just shared, we do see a lot of boards really creating that inventory of skills. So what skill set and strength do they have in the board today versus what are their gaps? What do they need to fill? And the technologies and innovations that we talked about earlier, or cyber, these are gaps in a lot of boards today, and they fill that in with external and other experts. But I do think when you do a gap analysis on the current board skill set, it really surfaces a lot of good information on where you are today versus where you may need to be a few years from now.
Great point. So if we can move along here, we want to talk about the next area, which is really a very interesting area. It's become sort of a sensitive touch point here, but and that's regulating big tech. Directors, as you can see on the screen, are relatively split on increased government regulation of FANG companies. And just so that everybody can understand, FANG, and I only learned this about a month ago, but FANG stands for Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, okay? And those against the regulatory check for big tech companies only outweigh those that favor it by a narrow margin, 45 to 41%, with 14% undecided. That part really doesn't surprise me that much, because it's rare that board members favor a regulation. So the almost even split doesn't surprise me. More than half, 53% of directors think the FANG companies have become too powerful in business and society, and which leads to the question, Nichole, where do you see this regulation going in this area, and sort of what is the ripple effect if all of a sudden there's more regulation on these quote powerful companies?
Sure. Well, TK, I agree. It is a hot topic today. Business leaders, including Apple's CEO Tim Cook and JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon, have really been outspoken in their advocacy for stricter data privacy protections in the U.S., just as an example. We really view that directors must thoroughly understand the risks associated with the stockpiling of data for the sake of profitability and ensuring the protection of that data and the customer. We encourage directors to build into their own board agenda a periodic regulatory update from experts in their industry sector to get an overview of what is expected in the future with regulations that are in the pipeline, because there is so much evolving today, and you really need updates from those who study this day in and day out. Just as an example, current bills in the House and Senate, including the bipartisan Honest Ad Act, would require more transparency about who is paying for the political ads on social media platforms, and that really in and of itself has a ripple effect. But specifically regarding that ripple effect, any new regulations we view must carefully consider compliance costs to avoid putting the smaller companies and the startups at a significant competitive disadvantage, to where an unintended consequence is that the FANG companies become even more powerful as they have the resources to manage the regulatory compliance and to shape it, for sure.
Well, there's no question that we've seen unintended consequences in regulation in the past. So I think that's a great point. So, well, let me move on to one of my more favorite topics, and that is director attributes. And in the survey, we asked directors to list the most important attributes when selecting their board's next new member. And as you can see, industry expertise, 1, financial experience, 2, gender diversity, is certainly a close third. Then IT, CEO experience, international experience, racial diversity. So here again, we have the opportunity to touch on this. And by the way, none of these are sort of mutually exclusive. We'd hope that a candidate might possess all of these that's on here, but when what sort of reaches out to me again is the gender diversity, and now ranks on this list third as the most important focus, suggesting the advantage of diverse perspectives is now more widely accepted, which I'm sure we both feel it is. At the same time, only 24% of the survey respondents supported the California bill that you mentioned that requires the gender diversity, and now we see that New Jersey is debating a similar bill. So with all that as background, how do you see the diversity conversation shifting, and when and how will we see the needle actually move on women in the boardroom?
Well, TK, I do think we are seeing the needle move, and that we see more and more highly qualified women board members being appointed quite often. In some areas, though, progress is slower than, of course, we would like. But I do think women won a record number of independent seats on Fortune 500 boards. If we look back into calendar 2017 and the data that exists there. But at the current pace, women will not reach parity with men in new board appointments until 2025 in the U.S., and that's according to the data published by the World Economic Forum. So I do think just in the marketplace today, we see pressure increasing. And just a couple of examples, TK. I know you and I both have been involved in financial services and financial institutions over the years, and a few of these are financial services examples, but BlackRock is asking companies in the Russell 1000 index with fewer than 2 women on their boards to explain their lack of progress from their perspective. State Street Global Advisors in September said that it's adopting additional measures to address companies with all-male leadership, with updated proxy voting guidelines in 2020 for firms that have no women on their boards and have failed to engage in successful dialogue on the State Street Global Advisors Board Diversity Program for 3 consecutive years. They began in 2017 to pressure companies on gender diversity at the board level. And to date, TK, more than 300 companies have added a female board director in response to its demands, and another 28 have pledged to do so. So I think there are a lot of pressures and increased focus and visibility on this, probably more so today than we've ever seen. We really encourage boards to understand the programs that are in place at the company to develop and maintain a qualified pipeline of diverse leaders. At the end of the day, that's what we're trying to achieve. And leaders and boards realize the need to increase the pipeline of diverse leadership talents. I think boards are really beginning to ask the right questions around the development plan, let's say for the top 50 leaders in the company, and ensuring that there is a good diverse representation in this group of leaders that they're focusing in on the development plans for. Within the company itself, we need to ensure that a diverse group of leaders are gaining the appropriate experience to become successful board members and C-suite members. And many leading companies, from our perspective, what we see in practice, have developed programs for senior level women below the C-suite to prepare them for future board positions. Again, I think in my view, TK, and a lot of the work that we're doing today, the goal is to ensure a robust, qualified pipeline of diverse leaders. And whether it is through a customized approach where you're developing custom programs for a top group of leaders, or whether it is an enterprise-wide program, we need to get to that outcome. And we do see more and more boards and management teams focused on this issue.
Well, you hit the nail right on the head when you talked about developing those diverse leaders within companies, because more embarrassing than the board representation is the senior management representation. And unless we get more diverse leaders, and diverse, I'm not just talking about gender, but also ethnicity and race here, people who attain the positions of CFOs or CEOs very, very often get board invitations, okay? The problem is we really don't have enough people in those C-suites from which to really, have the opportunity to recruit them. Yes, boards should go past CFOs and CEOs and look at all the talent that exists. And as you've noted, we've certainly gotten better at doing that. Although there's a ways to go. The numbers are encouraging as you watch, especially in 2018. You saw the number of new women board members increase nicely. It doesn't impact the major number as much as we'd like, but the trend is certainly in the right direction. One other thing, Nichole, I was surprised that when we looked at this list on this question, and maybe in the director's minds, this falls under IT or cyber expertise, but I thought for sure that one of the things that people would be looking for is someone with digital transformation expertise. I mean, everything that sort of we hear today is all about companies making sure that they are, on the front edge of this. And to me, I would suggest, and again, these issues are not mutually exclusive, I would suggest that you have somebody on your board that either understands, has gone through, or that can provide assistance to the board on what questions to ask in the area of digital transformation.
I agree with that, TK. And I'm not sure if it was in the way this was worded or the responses provided, but it was surprising to me as well. And we absolutely encourage that today. It's one of the number one issues, as we talked about at the opening of the program. And so to complement that, you need those on the board with that expertise as well to help guide the board.
So, Nichole, there's no shortage of topics as we move now to another hot button, okay, which is the corporate social responsibility. So expand there further beyond the diversity discussion. The majority of the corporations seem to be responding to stakeholders' increased focus on corporate citizenship. Obviously, not just big name investors like Larry Fink and what he put in his letter, but also the growing influence of the millennial consumer and the employee base, which we've seen become more vocal these days. 46% of directors said that they believe a corporate social responsibility policy brings a competitive advantage in today's marketplace. That's a huge number, okay? And with one third saying the greatest benefit that a CSR policy allows is the company to promote its value in actionable terms, leads me, when we look at this slide and we see which social cause do you believe bears the most influence in corporate reputation and CSR policy, number one in this by a big number, 51%, is diversity and inclusion, 23% is environment, 9% education, 7% healthcare, and 4% equality. And you can't see that on this slide, but those are the numbers, which leads me to ask you, where do you see boards making the greatest headway in CSR, and how can boards genuinely help sort of champion the CSR cause?
Sure. We see companies winning in this space that have a genuine demonstrated commitment to CSR. Those without an authentic, meaningful plan, we see kind of quickly finding themselves exposed and risking damage to reputation and the ability to retain that important talent base that we need today in this war for talent. Pardon me. So our recommendation is to follow a set of principles to guide your efforts. And the International Institute for Sustainable Development offers a checklist for employers, and we think that is a valuable guide, along with the mission statement and establishing metrics for measuring and reporting the outcomes you're trying to achieve with CSR. We just view it as really important to get started and aim for achievable goals. You don't have to start big. To the point that you raised on champions, certainly from a board standpoint, they can have an important impact. And then in addition, identifying internal champions who can really help get the initiative going throughout the organization to give the opportunity to all employees to engage and to give back. And again, we think those board level champions are extremely helpful. As practices take hold, employees will start coming forward with suggestions, and this should really be encouraged and rewarded. One of the companies that we have the pleasure to work with and really is known in this space is with Salesforce. And this is embedded in the goals of the employees. They are encouraged to be able to take CSR days to be able to give back and align it with their personal and professional goals. And it really is an enterprise-wide, all-employee effort. And I think to get to that, of course, you've got to start small and build to it, but give all of the employees that opportunity to participate and align to areas that they are interested in personally and professionally, and incorporate that into their goals individually as well. But TK, we see a number of leading practices here, and at the end of the day, CSR and a genuine effort in this area is really driving great business results and great retention of top talent.
Well, this was certainly an interesting question, and there's a lot of angst in board members around this whole area of climate and sustainability and ESG. They're trying to figure out how to report out on it and how to disclose and whatever. I was a little disappointed. My favorite area, education, only had a 9% as positive influence. To me, that would be my top, because I think if we have an educated nation, some of these things take care of themselves, because education provides the foundation to think things logically through. And obviously, it's difficult to argue with a topic like sustainability. Who doesn't want, their company to be around in 10 years? So,
right.
This is going to continue to be, I would suspect, a pretty hot company and board issue, for some time to come. And, investors, particularly with ESG, may get to the point where they're withholding votes on companies that aren't being responsive, just like what we see with the diversity. So a lot to unfold in this particular space. And we'll just need to keep our eyes open on how all of that does transpire.
TK, I agree with you, and I just to build on that. Some of the other areas that we see today, on the last point that you just made on the importance of ESG and really companies directing their votes for those who are strong in various areas in ESG or CSR. We do see a development with risk sensing at the board level and the ability to leverage new technology platforms to be able to scan a number of different attributes that are relevant to the scoring of ESG. So where this might come into play is where a company is making investments, or where a company is entering into mergers and acquisitions. And let's say they have a portfolio of acquisition targets. The ESG scoring would be one of those that is relevant to their desire to acquire the company. So with the great capabilities of technology today, you can scan against these attributes for environmental, social, governance today, and really be able to understand the leading companies when you compare them within a peer group. And these risk sensing platforms will score it and monitor it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and serve that up to a board and a management team in a dashboard so that they can monitor the improvements in ESG over time. So I just wanted to build on that there's some evolving technologies here that can help support and I think raise even greater visibility to ESG and CSR, TK.
Great point. So moving along here, whenever we do these studies, we try and touch on, as current topics as we can with some of this to sort of see if we can't see some trend lines. And obviously one of those topics is the economic and political considerations that's going on, not only in the U.S., but around the world. And when it comes to the impact of President Trump's tariff on globalization, corporate viability, and stock markets, it looked like directors are of two minds. They collectively rate the trade policy as the second most important factor, offering upside potential to the current economy, while also listing it as the number one factor in presenting downside risk to the economy. So that makes it a huge disruption issue for companies, depending on which side of that you fall. So, Nichole, I know you spend a lot of time in Washington. What are the conversations you're hearing, and what should boards be thinking about to navigate through this either disruption or opportunity?
Absolutely. It's a lot for boards to navigate through today. No surprise that Washington was mostly split upon partisan lines over the president last year using executive powers to impose the tariffs. However, President Trump's so-called trade tariff war did alarm the Democrats and the Republicans alike, particularly those being imposed on longtime favorite trading partners in Europe. So, in fact, a good example of this occurred in July of 2018 when the Senate voted 88-11 in favor of a non-binding resolution championed by then Tennessee GOP Senator Bob Corker that called for more congressional control on presidentially imposed tariffs. There was also bipartisan agreement, perhaps more quietly, that Trump's austere tariff increases on China steel and other goods was long overdue. So the United States and other countries had long been frustrated with China and looking to punish the country for apparently demand intellectual property from other countries to try to enter China's marketplace and for putting below-cost steel into the market by apparently cutting corners on environmental safeguards. The president had strong support on the steel issue from his base in Middle America, where steel production and related manufacturing remains a key part of their economy. So in recent weeks, Washington really appears to be increasing concerns about the tariff war as China, which has the world's second biggest economy after the U.S., has showed signs of a cooling economy, which would impact the global economy, of course. And the administration also apparently feels the heat as well. U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer is now negotiating with Beijing, but media reports suggest little progress is being made. So I think on an overall basis, TK, this year's record shutdown, it could eventually take its toll, especially on local economies like Washington and San Diego or Virginia Beach, 3 of the 5 U.S. metro regions with the biggest federal employee population. We see small businesses as well as farmers and rural communities and businesses that depend on federal contracts and approvals, it really taking a toll there. We saw a couple of, just to share a couple of other data points, financial rating agency Standard & Poor's found that the 16-day shutdown that occurred in October of 2013 took $24 billion out of the overall economy. And business leaders, as we speak with our clients, we really just encourage staying engaged with their congressional representatives and organizations that represent the business interests, such as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, about the urgency of reaching bipartisan compromise to keep the government open and agile.
So most directors say that it's too early to tell how the trade tariffs imposed and the corporate tax reforms passed in 2018 will impact their company's growth strategies. Here's another area where, what are you seeing? Is it, do you see, and your team, do they see a positive or negative? Do they think it's too early to tell? If that's the case, when will the impact be realized? And are there any current action items for boards now that they should be, considering?
Well, it's definitely important for boards to stay apprised, as you say, TK. It is a fluid environment with a lot of uncertainty, and having access to timely updates and analysis is key for making these strategic decisions for the health of the organization and the governance of the organization. Understanding the customer's response to volatility and planning for the impact on business. The University of Michigan's monthly consumer confidence report for January shows a decline to its lowest level since President Trump was elected. Consumers now sense a need to buttress their precautionary savings, which is typically done by reducing their discretionary spending. Evolving job and wage prospects, which were slightly weaker in early January, are critical to extending the current expansion. So while all of this definitely, these negotiations take time and they need consistency to avoid new conflicts down the road, given the current administration's unique strategy, the road ahead certainly appears rocky. I think what we are doing is having regular conversations with clients and consumers about some of the unavoidable cost increases due to tariffs, keeping just an open dialogue around the advice on the best strategies for your brand and your growth plan during this time. We're also engaging in TK at this point, just modeling around the potential downturn of the economy at some point, as many are predicting. So we're trying to do as much as we can to help think through this with clients, with management teams, with boards, in how to prepare for the opportunities that exist here, but as well as the potential downside, and how to prepare and kind of stress test your customer portfolio and understand who may be most at risk, and really be able to prepare for that.
Well, it's a lot to absorb, and yet it's certainly adds to the disruption and increases the necessity that we all stay on top of this, because there's no question that it impacts the future. So, as you know, Nichole, whenever we do these things, we try and provide key takeaways. Okay, so I'm going to tap you to sort of touch on what you believe are key takeaways that board members should be taking away from this webinar. And I will add my 2 cents in the end, and see if we can't bring some good summation to all the survey results that we've covered. So I'll turn it over to you.
All right, TK, this will be good to collaborate together here. So 3 major areas. Number 1, the importance of staying future-oriented as a board member. And we see leading boards doing this in a number of ways. It may be through experiencing leading technology events with your board peers and with industry sector peers. That might be an example of the Consumer Electronics Show that I mentioned earlier, or the upcoming South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, that's happening in early March, or the Wall Street Journal's Future of Everything. Experience that together as a board and management team, and talk about what the possibilities are for the future. The visiting innovation centers together as a board, or a Silicon Valley technology tour. I think the companies in the Silicon Valley are very open to sharing their innovation centers and to sharing their cultures and the way that they see the future. Amazon, Google, just a number of different organizations. I know just last week we were at Instagram and at Twitter, and just hearing some of the experiences and the way that they're focusing on regulation and culture and employee retention. It's all informative as it relates to how some of the largest companies in the United States are preparing for the future. I think, secondly, it is the importance of staying apprised just in building this into your everyday routine individually. And that may mean expanding what you're reading. So I mentioned Gary Shapiro's book, Ninja Future, at the opening of this session. and but highly recommend it. It shares the perspectives of a number of leading innovators, and Gary Shapiro certainly is one in leading as the CEO of the Consumer Technology Association. It may also be, and TK, I don't know how many of our listeners use Alexa and Alexa flash briefings, but it is a great way to keep apprised every morning. And just say, Alexa, play the flash briefing, and you can set it up to do the Wall Street Journal Tech News podcasts and Recode Decode and Masters of Scale, and follow these key influencers through the social networks. Even if you don't like to post on Twitter, let's say, it's a great way to just very quickly stay apprised of some of the leading discussions from innovators like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or the president, of course, in hearing some of the posts that are happening out there. So important, even if you don't use it to post, to use it as for reading in the social platforms. And the final area I would say is just incorporating this information from some of the leading thinkers as you use an outside-in perspective. You might be at an MIT or at CES or Silicon Valley, or you might be using your ecosystem Gartner experts or economists. We have our chief economist is Diane Swank, and really an amazing thought leader. Our chief public policy officer, Mary Moore Hamrick, they're completely apprised of the latest changes here and always pleased to speak with our clients and with boards. But once you incorporate that back into your management and your governance process, the last and the third area I would share, TK, is just the importance of risk sensing and stress testing. And in light of, for example, a potential economic downturn, or in light of the impact of the tariffs, there are great ways to leverage technology to really help you model out and stress test your customer portfolio, your investment portfolio, your debt, a number of different ways. And as a board member, we just encourage that that kind of dialogue with management is really at the top of the list right now, with a lot of the uncertainty that we see. And TK, as you and I both know and have talked about, that uncertainty creates a lot of challenge, but it also creates a lot of opportunity that companies have an opportunity to capitalize on. So those would be my top three, TK. What do you think?
Well, I just want to stress the point about keeping up with the shareholder engagement efforts. Everything is improved with communication, and all levels of communication is important. And for me, it starts with the communication between the board and management. If there isn't communication there, it's difficult to sort of get anything started. So that's sort of a first level, but it quickly escalates to the importance of the board and their communication with the shareholders and investors they represent. If you look at the history of engagement, several years ago, certainly on my show, we were just constantly preaching the importance of companies reaching out and engaging with investors. In the last couple of years, actually, I should tip my hat, because so many companies have been so successful in opening up those lines of communication that now when we have investors on the show, they say we don't necessarily need to meet with everyone, and they're actually trying to explain why sometimes they aren't meeting with companies that don't have problems. And it's because these companies have been so good about reaching out and trying to create face-to-face meetings with the investors that the investors don't have time to meet with, the companies, the thousands and thousands of companies that they oversee globally. So the good news is, keep that up. Now, the first line of communication is still the proxy. And I don't have time today to go through the things that, in a proxy that I think are a waste of time. But it is, without question, the first line of communication. And my suggestion to everybody would be to, if you're going to disclose something, don't just take whatever the compliant language is and stick it in there and say, okay, we've done our job. Explain a story, explain your situation. Tell a story about cDNA or your operating. Talk about what you can talk about related to your strategy or the way that you do board evaluation to evaluate board members. Anytime you're in a position to tell a story, it improves things. And obviously, proxy statements are the first line that everybody supposedly gets a chance to read. So, I encourage you, don't feel bad if investors say your company's doing well and we don't need to meet with you. Still give it an effort. Don't worry if they don't think you're doing something well, they will contact you. So don't feel bad if you're left alone on that side. But ultimately, Nichole, we've covered a lot of topics here. And I certainly want to thank you. It's always a pleasure for me when we get a chance to do programs like this together. And we certainly appreciate Grant Thornton being the partner with Corporate Board Member on this year's survey.
Thank you so much, TK. It was such a pleasure to be here with you, and look forward to collaborating further.
And audience, that will conclude this edition of our What Directors Think webinar. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and its information. There is information to reach out if there's other questions to be asked, but we want to thank you for taking the time, and hopefully it was helpful. And this is TK Kerstetter signing off for Corporate Board Member. Thanks, audience.